Aele had never expected his delivery route to take him anywhere near the great palace of Varelia, but the storms over the outer moons had forced his small cargo ship far off course, and now the worn metal vessel lay tilted in the dust on the wide plateau just beyond the capital's shining walls. The smell of burnt wiring still hung in the air as he climbed out, brushing gray ash from his jacket. The sky above was a strange deep violet, and the twin suns sent long shadows across the cracked surface. In the distance, the towers of the palace caught the light like spears of gold, but Aele's attention was fixed on the sound that rolled through the air. It was not thunder, yet it rumbled deep enough to make the ground shiver beneath his boots. A sound like a cry drawn out and layered with something more than grief, almost as if the planet itself was mourning. Before he could take a step, a group of armored figures appeared from the haze, their armor gleaming in the sunlight with patterns that shifted like living metal. They moved with perfect precision, and before Aele could explain himself, the tallest among them barked an order in a language he did not know, yet somehow understood in fragments. The words "intruder" and "queen" and "bring" him echoed in his head. The guards surrounded him and marched him toward the palace gates. The massive doors opened silently, revealing a hall that seemed carved from a single block of luminous stone. Its ceiling stretched so high it vanished into shadow. Pillars rose like trees, their surfaces carved with scenes of battles and coronations. But the air in that hall was not filled with the quiet respect Aele expected. It shook with the same cry he had heard outside. The sound came again, and the walls themselves seemed to hum. The guards led him through twisting corridors and into a chamber lined with banners of deep crimson. At the far end, upon a dais, sat the Queen of Varelia. Her crown was not a single piece of metal, but a living wreath of silver threads that moved gently as if breathing. Her eyes were a color Aele could not name, a swirling mix of blues and greens that seemed almost alive. She did not rise when he entered. She simply studied him, her gaze sharp yet carrying something he could not place. The cry came again, and Aele's chest tightened with a strange feeling. The Queen's voice, when it came, was soft but carried through the hall like music. "You are not from here." Her words were not a question, but a statement. "The guards have told me you fell from the sky, and you survived." Aele shifted on his feet. "I was just making a delivery. The storm knocked me off course. I didn't mean to intrude." She raised a hand, silencing him, her expression unreadable, yet there was no anger in her face, only weariness and something deeper, perhaps desperation. "For many cycles, my child has not ceased to cry. The greatest minds of my world have failed. The finest healers have failed. The sound you hear is the voice of my heir, and with each day it grows louder, threatening the stability of my palace and perhaps my throne. I have seen visions stranger than most believe in them, and they tell me someone from beyond the stars can bring peace to my child." Aele opened his mouth to respond, but she leaned forward, and her next words froze him where he stood. "Quiet, my baby, and you will be my mate." Hall seemed to fall silent, except for the soft echo of her voice. Aele could not be sure if he had heard her correctly. The offer was absurd, and yet the look in her eyes told him she meant every word. The guards watched with unreadable faces as he tried to find words. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm not a healer or a diplomat. I'm just a pilot. I deliver supplies." The Queen tilted her head, her crown of silver threads shimmering like liquid in the light. "No mistake was made. You are here, and that is enough. You may refuse and leave, but the gates of this city will not open for you again till my child is silent, and my heart tells me you are the one to do it." Her words carried the weight of command, and Aele felt the room close in around him. The cry sounded again, deeper and stronger, shaking the banners on the walls. For a moment, he saw a flicker of emotion in the Queen's eyes, fear not for herself, but for her child and for her people. Aele took a slow breath. He had no idea how to calm an alien baby, but there was something about the way she looked at him, something that made it impossible to turn away. He thought of the crash of the endless storm outside the palace, and of the strange chance that had brought him here. "If I try and fail," he asked finally, "will I still be allowed to leave?" The queen's gaze softened ever so slightly. "Yes, but you will not fail." Guards stepped aside, and one gestured toward a set of tall doors at the far end of the chamber. Eli glanced at them, then back at the queen. Her expression had returned to one of regal calm, yet he could feel the tension beneath. Ive nodded slowly and began to walk toward the doors, each step carrying him closer to a task he neither understood nor believed he could complete. The cries grew louder with every step, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. When he reached the doors, they opened silently, revealing a pale blue light and the sound of a child's grief echoing like a living storm. And in that moment, Eli knew whatever awaited him beyond those doors was going to change his life forever. Moment Eli stepped into the nursery chamber, he was hit by a wave of warmth, mixed with the scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. The walls were curved and glowed with a pale blue light, as if the stone itself held the sky within it. Enormous windows revealed the violet horizon beyond, but his eyes were drawn to the center of the room, where a cradle floated gently above the floor. Suspended by shimmering threads of energy inside lay the source of the sound that had rattled the palace and perhaps the entire city for days. Child was smaller than Eli expected, yet she carried an air of strange importance. Her skin was a smooth silver that reflected the glow of the room, her eyes large and shimmering like pools of liquid starlight, and yet those eyes were squeezed shut as she let out another cry that rolled through the air, shaking the light fixtures and making the energy threads waver. Her tiny hands clenched and unclenched while her body trembled with each sound she made. Two attendants stood nearby, their faces pale with exhaustion. They wore garments of soft green, and their long hair was braided with beads that jingled faintly, but even the gentle sound could not mask the weight of the baby's voice. When they saw Eli, they exchanged uncertain glances. One of them stepped forward, speaking in a careful, measured tone. "She has not stopped since the day the last moon passed over the horizon. We have tried the ancient songs, the healing crystals, the warmth of the sun gardens. Nothing can bring her peace. And now the queen believes you are the one." Eli hesitated, unsure how to approach the child. He had never even held a baby before, not a human one, not an alien one, and certainly not the heir to an entire world. But there was no escape in the eyes of those watching. He took a slow step toward the cradle, feeling the low vibration of her cries in his bones, knelt beside her, lowering himself until he was at her level. The cries grew softer for a heartbeat, then rose again, almost as if she was testing the presence of the stranger before her. Eli could feel the tension in the room, the attendants holding their breath, the guards at the door silent but ready, the hum of the floating cradle faint against the sound of the baby's voice. Remembered his sister's child back home, how the only thing that would calm her on bad nights was a slow, gentle hum, something from an old earth lullaby his sister had taught him long ago. It was a tune about the sea and the stars, and though the words were old, the melody had always worked for the little girl. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then began to hum the low, soft sound filling the space between them. At first there was no change. The baby continued to cry, but after a few breaths her voice faltered, the trembling slowed, her silver eyelids fluttered, and one tiny glowing eye opened to look at him. There was no recognition. There could not be yet. Eli felt as though she was seeing something in him, something she had been searching for. Her hand reached up, tiny fingers curling in the air as the hum carried on. The attendants glanced at each other, their exhaustion replaced with cautious hope. The guards at the door shifted, as if unsure whether to be amazed or suspicious. The baby's cries grew quieter still until they faded into a series of soft whimpers, and finally into silence. The sudden absence of sound was almost shocking after the endless noise that had filled the air. Eli kept humming just in case, letting the melody flow until he felt her small body relax fully, her breathing even and calm. When he stopped, the room was utterly still, the only sound the faint hum of the cradle's energy threads. The attendants moved forward when adjusting the light in the room. while the other gently tucked a soft cloth around the child. Her glowing eyes blinked slowly before closing again. In Anwa, peaceful sleepy Lee stood slowly, unsure what to say. He had no idea why it worked, or if it would last, but the change was undeniable. He turned toward the door, expecting someone to call the queen. But instead he found her already there, watching silently from the threshold, her expression unreadable, her silver crown catching the light. She stepped inside, her movements quiet, yet somehow commanding every eye in the room. She approached the cradle and looked down at her child, the faintest sigh leaving her lips, though her voice when she spoke was calm and steady. You have done in minutes what my people could not achieve in many suns. Tell me how. Ely shrugged almost awkwardly. Just a song I knew back home. Maybe she liked it. The queen studied him for a moment longer, then looked back at the baby, her voice lowered so only he could hear. Perhaps it is not the song, but the one who sang it. There are forces older than my kingdom, and they speak through bonds unseen. Words puzzled him, but before he could reply the ground gave a faint tremor, far lighter than the ones before, yet enough to send a ripple of unease through the attendants. The queen straightened her eyes, sharpening once again. The peace you have given is fragile. There are those who will see your presence as a threat. Ile frowned. I didn't come here to be part of politics. You are part of it now, whether you wish it or not, she replied simply, and with that, she turned to leave, the guards opening the doors for her. Without a sound as she left, Eli glanced back at the baby, still sleeping, her silver skin glowing faintly in the blue light. Something about her expression made him think she was dreaming, and he wondered if the lullaby had followed her into whatever world her mind had drifted to. He did not know that outside the nursery, the news of his success was already spreading through the palace corridors, whispered by attendants and soldiers alike, and with each telling the story grew more powerful. A stranger from the stars had silenced the storm, and far beyond the palace walls, in the great halls of the nobles and the hidden chambers of the council, others were beginning to ask the same question. Who was this human, and why had the queen chosen him? The following morning the palace stirred with a different kind of energy. The long echoes of the baby's cries had vanished, leaving the vast halls filled with a quiet that seemed strange to those who had lived in the constant tremor of sound for days. Yet beneath the surface of relief, there was a murmur of unease, whispers that wound their way through every corridor about the human who had done what none of the queen's own people could do. Servants paused in their work to trade hurried words. Guards leaned close to each other, speaking in low voices, and nobles gathered in shaded alcoves, their eyes shifting toward the foreigner. Whenever he passed, Ely was given a chamber on the east wing near the gardens. Though it was large and filled with strange treasures from across the world, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. The guards at his door stood silent and expressionless, yet he felt their gaze on him every time he moved. He spent the first hour pacing, unsure if he should be preparing to leave or waiting for the queen to summon him again. When the knock finally came, it was soft yet certain. One of the attendants from the nursery entered, a tall figure with calm eyes, who spoke in the same careful tone as before. The queen requests your presence. She wishes you to spend more time with the heir to ensure her peace holds. Eli followed without question, his steps echoing along the polished floor. The nursery was brighter in the daylight, the pale blue glow now mixed with warm golden light from the twin suns. The baby lay in the floating cradle, her silver skin glinting softly, her eyes open and following the shapes of light drifting across the ceiling. When she saw Ele, she let out a small sound, not quite a cry, but not laughter either. Her tiny hands reached toward him, and the attendant stepped back, allowing him to approach. He began to hum again, the same melody from the night before, and she responded almost at once, her movements calming, her gaze fixed on him as though she recognized his voice. One of the attendants whispered something to the other about the bond forming too quickly, but they fell silent. When the queen entered, she watched for a moment, then came forward, the silver threads of her crown shimmering in the sunlight. She did not speak at first, only placed a hand lightly on the edge of the cradle, as though testing the quiet for herself. When she finally spoke, her voice carried both relief and calculation. "The silence you bring is more than comfort, it is protection, if the crying were to return." The structural wards of the palace could fail, the walls themselves might weaken. Eli frowned. "So it is not just noise, it is dangerous." She nodded slowly. "The voice of the air is bound to the old forces of this world. Her cries call to the deep stones and awaken them too long, and the stones answer with collapse. You have done more than calm a child, you have saved a kingdom." Weight of her words settled heavily on him. He had thought of this as a strange favor, perhaps even a trap, but now he saw there was more at stake than he imagined. Later that day, he was taken to a great hall where the queen met with her council, tall robed figures with eyes like polished metal who spoke in slow, measured tones. They bowed to her, but not to him. Some of their gazes were sharp like blades. One elder spoke plainly, saying, "It is dangerous to place so much trust in an outsider. The quiet could be a trick. The child could be under some foreign influence." Another warned that other worlds might hear of this and demand the human be given to them. The queen silenced them with a single look, her voice cold yet steady. "This man is under my protection. He has done what none of you could do, and for that he will be honored." Her words did not end the matter. L.A. could feel the hostility in the air as the council dispersed, some offering stiff nods, others leaving without a word. Outside the hall, a narrow-eyed noble brushed past him, muttering something about the throne belonging to their own kind. He was beginning to understand that his place here was not safe. That evening, he returned to the nursery, only to find the baby restless, her small body shifting in the cradle, her eyes darting toward the shadows. Eli knelt beside her, speaking softly. Though he was not sure if she could understand his words, he began the lullaby once more, but this time he added a slow rhythm, tapping the cradle lightly to match the beat. After a few moments, her breathing steadied the tension, leaving her small frame. It was then that he noticed movement in the far corner of the room, a flicker of shadow that did not belong. He rose quickly, moving toward it, but by the time he reached the spot, there was nothing. The attendants looked at him with concern, and he decided not to mention it yet, though in his mind the image remained clear. Someone had been there watching, and perhaps waiting. Next morning, the queen summoned him privately in a smaller chamber, lined with shelves of crystal spheres, each one glowing faintly. She spoke without preamble. "There are those who will try to harm you because of the bond with my child. Some may even seek to harm her in order to remove you from my side. You must be prepared." Eli crossed his arms. "I am not a warrior." She stepped closer, her gaze holding his. "Then you will have to become one, at least enough to survive." From that day, he was assigned a guard captain named Rin, a quiet man with a scar along his jaw, who trained him in the palace courtyard in the mornings. The baby's quiet presence kept the palace at peace, but outside those walls, danger moved unseen. Whispers grew sharper, and the shadow he had seen in the nursery seemed to follow him through his dreams. Eli had come here by accident, but the longer he stayed, the clearer it became that leaving might no longer be an option for forces beyond his control. Were already deciding his place in this world and in the life of the silver-skinned child, who now looked to him with trust. Days passed in a strange rhythm for Eli: mornings in the training yard with Rin, afternoons in the nursery, evenings in his chamber under the watch of silent guards. The baby remained calm whenever he was near her, soft silver skin warm under the golden light of the twin suns, her glowing eyes following him with a focus that seemed almost older than her small form. Yet outside that small circle of peace, the palace was shifting, whispers growing into open tension, nobles arguing more openly in the great hall, some insisting the human was a blessing, others calling him a danger to tradition. The queen kept her expression neutral in public, but Eli could see the strain in the lines at the corners of her eyes. One evening, after a day that had been too quiet, Eli walked the long corridor toward the nursery. The guards at the door stepped aside without a word. Inside, the air felt wrong, heavier than usual. The pale glow of the walls seemed dimmer. He glanced toward the cradle and saw the baby awake, her eyes wide, but not crying, her small hands gripping the edge of the floating bed as if she sensed something unseen. He crossed the room and began to hum the lullaby. But before he could finish the first verse, a sound behind him made him turn. There in the shadows by the far wall stood a figure dressed in dark fabric that shimmered like oil, their face hidden by a mask shaped like a long beak. Their stance low and ready, in their hand a thin blade gleamed with a faint green light. Ely did not think. He moved between the cradle and the figure, his voice rough. "Who are you?" The intruder did not answer. Instead they stepped forward in a slow, deliberate pace, the blade catching the blue light of the walls. Eli's heart pounded. He had no weapon, no armor, only his own body. He shifted his stance the way Rin had taught him, knees slightly bent, eyes fixed on the threat. The figure lunged fast as lightning. Eli sidestepped barely in time. The blade slicing the air where he had been, he grabbed for the intruder's wrist, but they twisted away, coming around for another strike. The baby made a small, sharp sound, not a cry but a warning. Eli ducked under the next swing, then drove forward, using his shoulder to push the figure back. They stumbled into the edge of the wall, and for a moment, the shimmer in their clothing flickered before the fight could continue. The nursery doors burst open. Rin and two guards rushing inside. The intruders spun toward the window, their blade flashing once more before they leapt through, shattering the thin crystal barrier and vanishing into the violet dusk below. The guards ran to the opening, but the attacker was already gone, leaving only a faint trace of that strange green light fading in the air. Rin turned to Eli, his eyes scanning him for injuries. None of the cuts had reached him. Though his breathing was heavy, the captain's voice was calm but firm. This was no thief. That blade was poisoned. They wanted the air dead. Eli felt his stomach tighten. He looked at the baby, still watching him, her small face calm despite what had just happened. Rin's words echoed in his head. Someone had tried to kill her, and if he had not been there, the attempt might have succeeded. That night the Queen summoned him to her private chambers. The room lit only by the soft glow of tall crystal lamps. She stood by the window, looking out at the twin moons, her voice quiet but edged with steel. "You have seen now what I have long feared. There are those who would see my line ended, to take the throne for themselves. They will not stop until either you or the child is gone." Eli stepped closer. "I do not know why they see me as a threat. I only sang to her." The Queen turned her gaze to him, her eyes sharp like the edge of a blade. "They fear the bond between you and my daughter. It is older than politics, older than my reign. There's an old prophecy that speaks of a child who will unite worlds and a voice from the stars that will guard her to them. You are the voice, Eli." Let the words settle in his mind. They sounded like something out of the old spacer tales his father used to tell, yet here he was living inside one. The Queen stepped closer, her silver crown catching the light. "You saved her once and now again with your life. That makes you part of this kingdom, whether you wished it or not." From that night, security around the nursery doubled. No one entered without strict inspection. Eli kept close to the baby as much as possible, and in the quiet moments he found himself thinking less about returning to his ship and more about what it meant to stay here. There was danger, but also something else, a strange sense of belonging that he could not quite explain. Whispers in the palace halls did not stop. Some grew bolder, speaking of removing the Queen herself and putting another on the throne, one who would follow old ways and keep outsiders from holding influence. Eli heard the words but said nothing. He had learned quickly that in this place every word spoken could be used as a weapon. Rin trained him harder, teaching him how to disarm a knife, how to move quietly, how to read a room before stepping into it. Eli learned fast, driven by the memory of the masked attacker in the nursery. Each night when he returned to his chamber, he could still hear the faint shattering sound of the crystal window, still see the glint of green poison in the blade. The baby, however, seemed untouched by the fear around her. She laughed for the first time one morning, a small, clear sound that made even the stone-faced guards glance at each other in surprise. She reached for Eli whenever he entered, and her glowing eyes followed him until he came close enough to hold her in those moments. The palace felt almost safe, but Eli knew safety here was an illusion, and the attempt on the baby's life had only been the first move. The real danger was still waiting in the shadows, watching and preparing to strike again. The days that followed the attack felt sharper than before. Every corridor of the palace carrying a tension that never seemed to fade. Guards stood at every turn, their eyes scanning every shadow, every sound taken seriously, yet the air carried not only fear, but the weight of something inevitable. Eli knew that sooner or later those behind the attempt would act again, and when they did, there would be no second chance to protect the baby. The queen called into the great hall on the morning of the twin suns, rising in perfect alignment above the palace towers, a rare event that turned the entire city gold. The council was gathered, their tall figures robed in deep colors. The nobles arranged on either side of the hall, and at the far end, the throne stood waiting for its ruler. The queen entered with slow, steady steps, her silver crown alive with light. She carried the child in her arms, and every eye in the room followed her. Eli stood to one side, unsure why he had been called, but the queen's gaze found him, and she motioned for him to come forward. The hall was silent, except for the faint hum of the energy threads in the cradle. When she spoke, her voice filled the space without effort. "This man," she began, "is not of our world yet. He has done what none of us could do when the voice of the air shook these walls. He brought peace when danger came in the night. He stood between death and my child. He has shown courage, loyalty, and a heart that holds no greed." A murmur moved through the gathered nobles, some in agreement, others whispering sharply. The queen ignored them and continued, "There are those among you who fear him because he is different, because he comes from beyond the stars. But the prophecy tells of a voice from the stars, who will protect, the one who will unite worlds. I tell you now, this prophecy lives in him and in her." She looked down at the baby, who gazed back at her with calm silver eyes. Then the queen lifted her head and spoke words that struck like a bell. "I renew the promise I made the day he came here. Quiet my child and you will be my mate. He has done so not once but many times, and so I offer him not a bargain but a choice." Eli felt the weight of every gaze in the hall. The moment seemed unreal. When he had crash-landed here, he had thought only of fixing his ship and leaving. Now the thought of leaving felt strange and hollow. He thought of the baby's small hand gripping his finger, of her laugh echoing in the quiet nursery, of the way the queen's voice softened when she spoke to her daughter. He thought of the danger, yes, but also of the strange sense of belonging that had crept into his heart. "If I stay," he said slowly, "I stay because I choose to, not because of a bargain." The queen's lips curved in the smallest of smiles. "Then stay," she said, "and let the court bear witness." The murmur in the hall rose to a storm. Some shouted in anger, others in joy. The council members exchanged looks heavy with meaning, but the queen's voice rose above them. "All then, it is done by my word and my crown. He stands at my side from this day, and the heir will grow under the protection of both her blood and her bondren." Stepped forward, bowing his head to Eli, and for the first time the guard's face showed something like respect. The queen handed the baby to Eli, and her tiny fingers curled into his shirt, holding on with surprising strength. Her glowing eyes locked on his face, as if she understood the choice he had made. From that day the palace shifted. The whispers did not vanish, but they grew quieter. Those who opposed the queen kept their distance for a time. The masked attacker was never found, though. Eli knew they would try again someday, yet he was no longer unprepared. He trained daily with Rin, learned the ways of the court and of the city, and most of all he spent his days with the baby, whose laugh could now be heard more often than her cry. Months later, when the twin suns set together, casting the sky in deep red, Eli stood with the queen on the balcony, overlooking the city lights below. The air was warm, and the scent of the night flowers drifted from the gardens. She spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "I do not know what paths lie ahead for us, but I know this world is stronger with you here." Eli looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in her cradle. the threads of energy holding her gently above the floor. He thought of the first time he had heard her cry, the sound like the earth itself breaking, and of the quiet that had followed when she had looked at him for the first time. Then he looked at the queen and said simply, "I am where I am meant to be." And so under the twin moons of Varelia, in a palace that had once trembled under the cries of its heir, the human who had fallen from the sky stood beside the alien queen, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as part of something greater. A family bound not by blood alone, but by choice, and by a bond that neither distance nor danger could break. Kingdom would face many trials in the years to come, but that night, as the city slept and the palace stood in perfect silence, there was peace, and in that peace, a promise that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. The end.